Empowered Divorce and the excuse me, I'll start over. Hi, beautiful. I'm Beverly Price of Her Empowered Divorce and a founder of the Divorce Coalition. With over 30 years experience in divorce coaching, I am so glad that you are here with me today to learn more about divorce. And today, given that October is National Domestic Violence Month, I wanted to bring you something special. Domestic violence is something that gets under my skin. As a survivor myself, I want to carry the message to so many more people so that the awareness and education of domestic violence is in the forefront and no longer a secret. Well, my guest today is Angela Sarabia, and Angela is an incredible former prosecutor and playwright. She's an attorney who has spent most of her career prosecuting crimes, especially violent crimes against women. And this is so incredibly important. And while she was a prosecutor, she won lots of awards from domestic violence associations. But get this, in her spare time, she's also an actress and a playwright. So she has been inspired to write a play about domestic violence, and that is so incredible. Angela, I'm so happy to have you here today. Thank you so much for sharing your time.
Thank you for having me.
Can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Right now, for many years, I was a prosecutor. That's what I always wanted to do out of law school. During that time, just like, as you said, I really focused on domestic violence. I had done a special training in law school where they let us go into a specialized domestic violence unit and help with the cases, and it really inspired me. Like you said, it gets under my skin. So I was like, what else can I do? So when I prosecuted, I handled all kinds of cases, but I really poured extra time and energy into the domestic cases because they were near and dear to my heart. And then eventually, after a few years of prosecuting, started to have kids and decided I wanted to homeschool my kids. So I focus on that during the daytime. But just like you're talking about, acting is my hobby. So I'll audition, I'll get into a show, I'll do that in the evening. So much fun. Good way to kind of get away from the kids and do that. And then eventually, it inspired me to write my own play, which I did. And during all that time, I'll take on cases here and there. Because people kind of know that domestic violence is something that I know a lot about. I'll often get folks from my church approach me and say, "Hey, my daughter," or "Oh, my sister," and I handle little pro bono things as they come along, still keeping my brain sharp and handling cases as I can. So I still stay very involved in the fight, but just now no longer as a prosecutor.
Awesome. Well, I think it's so interesting to think about what domestic violence looks like from a prosecutor's point of view. We look at it as either from a victim, a survivor, an abuser, or an outsider, what I'd call an observer point of view. But from a prosecuting point of view, you are in the trenches. So, can you describe for us? I think the starting point is when that violent episode happens. And I do want to make it clear to everybody that domestic violence and abuse is so much more than just physical abuse. But here specifically, we will be talking about violent episodes. And can you share with us kind of what it looks like once law enforcement has been called about a violent episode?
Yes. So after law enforcement has been called, they will attempt to gather any information they can to figure out, first of all, whether or not a crime has occurred. Sometimes the abuser has figured out that if there's a fight and law enforcement's going to be called, they'll try to call. So
Mhm.
regardless of who called law enforcement, uh, they'll usually try to figure out who the primary aggressor is, who is the person who is been the most violent or maybe the most physical capable, who's been causing the most damage. Maybe he shoved her and he's twice her size and she kind of pushed him away, and then he slapped her and she kind of whacked his arm. law enforcement might determine, okay, he's the primary aggressor here. He's the one bringing it on, doing the most damage. But either way, once that primary aggressor is determined and all the evidence is gathered, and this can involve taking photographs, taking witness statements. Sometimes if the event occurs in front of an independent witness, that person is interviewed about what occurred. And then the primary aggressor is arrested and taken to jail. For domestic violence cases, normally anybody arrested for a crime gets to pay bail money and get out. But for domestic violence cases, they're held all the way until 12 or 24 hours to give that victim time, if she'd like to gather belongings and get to a safe location. They can't bond out right away, but then they do almost all pay bond money, get out of jail, and then wait to receive word about when court hearings will begin.
Wow. So, do you think, from the law enforcement point of view, when they're called, how difficult a decision is it, or an analysis is it, of who's the aggressor, and kind of a take on what's going on? Do you think that's real difficult, or is usually pretty obvious?
Yeah, it's very difficult. So,
Okay.
it is typically the case that there's a lot going on in a case of domestic violence. There's often a lot going on. Most Both of the parties may be consuming alcohol. One party may be extremely upset. Oftentimes, this is something that tripped up law enforcement in early days back in the 1950s. They'd come to interview the parties, and she would just be hysterical, upset, not making sense, whereas he would be cool as a cucumber, totally calm, because he had sort of gotten the upper hand in the situation. Now, law enforcement receives special training on domestic violence. They understand some of those dynamics involved, but it can be extremely difficult. Oftentimes, if the victim's been through some kind of trauma, she may tell the details, not really in the order of events of what happened from moment to moment. She may tell it as the most important thing first, and then go back, and then skip things, and then go back. So oftentimes, kind of untangling what exactly occurred is very difficult. And then fitting those occurrences into what crimes to charge the assailant with can be difficult. So oftentimes, once the arrest is made, the whole file will go to a prosecutor, and that prosecutor will take a close look at the circumstances and really look at the law and determine, okay, what are the proper and appropriate charges that should be laid here? And it may be different from whatever law enforcement initially decided, but determining that primary aggressor is very hard. But law enforcement can't arrest both parties because we need somebody to testify here. So that primary aggressor does need to be determined.
Now, when police are called and there is an arrest, that is a criminal charge, correct? So it doesn't matter if the victim decides to prosecute or not, correct? They're going to be charged. But
That's
so
right.
can the
So
victim change their mind?
That's a good question. It's complicated. Once law enforcement officials are made aware of facts and circumstances that lead them to believe a crime has occurred, their duty is to arrest and charge the individual with the crime, technically. So even if a victim says, "Well, I don't want him arrested," if they determine a crime has occurred, they are to arrest in any case, regardless. Now, if the crime is very minor, let's say somebody kind of shoved somebody out of the way, and the victim says, they don't really want this to go that far as to get somebody arrested. Law enforcement does have a little bit of discretion there. But if something serious has occurred and there's an injury, they're almost certainly going to arrest. And then once that case has been initiated and it gets to the prosecutor, same thing. Prosecutor does have a little discretion, if the injuries are minor, if there's other circumstances going on, and the victim doesn't want to cooperate. Sometimes a prosecutor can listen to that, but in most cases, where it's clear a crime has occurred, it's clear that the victim has been injured, the prosecutor is going to go forward, and it's not up to the victim anymore. And the victim is just a witness in the prosecutor's case. So a prosecutor is going to want to hear what a victim has to say, but ultimately will need to do what's best for society when there's a criminal charge.
Absolutely. Now, when you see victims, do they cross economic, educational, geographic, age, or is there a predominant group that tends to be victimized?
That's a great question. I mean, it is everybody and anybody. It is cutting across every socioeconomic status, every race and ethnicity. Um, you may see the case that it's less often that wealthier individuals call law enforcement because they may have other family, friends, other means of escaping a situation. Whereas for individuals who have no support structure, law enforcement is the only line of defense. So you may see that law enforcement might be called a little bit more frequently and those folks with less means, but it's going on in all of our homes. I mean, if one statistic shared by the Divorce Coalition, which I think is right on, is that it is occurring in one out of every three relationships. So one out of every three women, somebody is, at least one of them is a victim of domestic violence. They may have become a victim and never called law enforcement, but that is how often this is occurring. And it's happening in not only every socioeconomic status, but every faith tradition, every profession. So you may hear a victim disclose to you that her significant other has been violent. And you might say, well, gee, he's a doctor. I wouldn't think that a doctor but it really is it really cuts across everything because it's a pattern of abuse related to the batterer. So batterers come from every walk of life. So victims come from every walk of life.
Can you tell us a little bit about the differences in the court system that would handle a domestic violence case versus the court system that would handle a divorce?
Yes. Divorces are so common now. If you haven't been divorced, you know somebody who has. So it's kind of a
Mhm.
system we're all familiar with. We've seen, it basically a divorce is in the civil law system. That's the system that handles any dispute between two individuals. Out of all the legal cases in the country, the vast majority are civil cases. Auto accidents, you're suing insurance, slip and fall cases, business contracts are all civil law. So when you have a divorce, it's just two people trying to disentangle their finances, is what it really is when you boil it down. The criminal case or criminal law system is much smaller and handles those cases where a crime has been committed, our laws have been broken, and those cases are the state of where you live. So in my case, Florida, the state of Florida versus the defendant, the person that's broken the laws. So in the criminal law system, the rules are very different. And like in a divorce case, the judge is just bound by a standard of proof of preponderance of the evidence. Which party seems to have the greater weight of the evidence, whichever party seems to have that party prevails. That's the standard. In the criminal law world, we have the presumption of innocence, and we would rather 100 guilty people go free than one innocent person be convicted. So the scales are kind of stacked in favor of the person charged with a crime. So they get a lot of rights, like we're all familiar with the right to remain silent, the right to an attorney. They get all those rights. And when you go into trial, which very few cases do, but when you do, the prosecutor has to prove that the crime occurred, and the standard of proof is beyond a reasonable doubt. So if the jury's sitting there and they have any reasonable doubt that a crime has been committed and that the defendant is the one that has committed it, they are to find him not guilty. So because that standard of proof is so high, it can be much harder to reach that guilty verdict in a
Right.
criminal case. So it's just a different system, and victims who find themselves in that system, because they've been a victim of domestic violence, should just be aware of those differences. And that's where getting a good domestic violence victims advocate can be great. Every domestic violence organization in every state and locality has one. So if you get to know your organization really well, they can give you somebody that can walk you through the process. Every sheriff's office has a victims advocate office. So you can call the sheriff's office and say, hey, I'm a victim. I'm a little confused here. I don't really know this system. And they'll assign someone to you to help you. And I highly recommend that. I wouldn't try to go through that system alone.
Absolutely. And I would assume that since 24% of divorce cases cite domestic violence as a cause, which is so tragic. So, what would a victim of domestic violence going through divorce have to do to keep her loved ones safe? For example, I would think if the abuser was acquitted in court but was actually an abuser, he would then target the victim and lash out at the victim more out of anger for, you know, prosecuting him. So I think that's a huge risk. But just going through a divorce, thinking about leaving, telling him she's leaving if she decides to, actually leaving, what are the things that need to happen for safety purposes, not only for her, but her children?
There's so much to unpack there. First, one thing that you said that stood out to me, and I think this is 100% the case, is that you can count, I would bet my life savings, every single batterer that comes through the court system blames everybody but themselves for all of their bad circumstances. Their family members, the people close to them, but most often the victim. That batterer will come in and blame the victim. And that can, and a lot of times the victim knows that. So she's coming into my office as a prosecutor and saying, hey, I changed my mind. I don't want to do this anymore, because she can see no matter what happens, she's going to get blamed for everything. And that is the case, like just like you said, when they get successfully prosecuted and eventually get out, or whether the case goes south and he beats the charge and gets out, you can bet he's going to blame her. But that's the reason why you've got to go. You've got to get out of that circumstance. You can't win, because no matter every negative circumstance in his life, he's often blaming the victim for. So what she needs to do, and I say she because in the vast majority of domestic violence cases, victims tend to be women and batters tend to be men. Those statistics are all different for homosexual couples, and there are men who are victims, but by and large, those pronouns kind of work. So she needs to, number one, find her place of safety. This may not be the home she shared with the batterer. It may mean that she needs to, in a case of extreme violence, anytime you have threats to kill, a batterer cutting off the airflow, a batterer displaying weapons, talking about weapons, pointing weapons during an argument, anytime any of those things are at play in a relationship, there's a much greater likelihood of fatality. So there have been cases where defendant has been arrested, he bonds out and he goes straight to murder the victim. So keeping that in mind, not to scare anybody, but bearing that in mind, if you've had some of those things go on, the shelter is a great option. Every county, city, and state has a shelter for victims. They have a 1-800 number. You call them, they'll take you to a confidential location, to a fortified place where nobody knows where it is. As a prosecutor, I didn't know the location of the shelter. They'll provide transportation. You go to that place. Then they can help you with relocation assistance. You need to change people, places, and things. So you get to a new apartment, a new locality, and you make sure all that information about now where you have relocated to is confidential. You don't share that address with just anyone. Another great thing for victims to do is get a restraining order. People are kind of familiar with those. There's a lot of misconceptions, but the courthouse will call it an injunction for protection. But you go down there, you fill out paperwork, you attend a hearing, and if the judge finds that there's good cause, he'll order the batterer not to come to certain locations the victim frequents, like her workplace, her children's school, the church she worships at, things like that, so that that way, if she's in that location and she sees the batterer, she can call law enforcement before he does anything criminal. Um, she can, I would recommend getting a new phone, maybe shutting down Facebook and Instagram for a while, shutting down all those ways that a batterer can track the location and can contact the victim. A lot of times the victim thinks she needs to be in contact with the batterer because she needs to kind of keep him calm. He sort of reinforced this idea that she's in charge of his emotional state. So she'll be like, well, I can't stop talking to him because I need to explain why I had to call law enforcement, or I need to tell him that I still love him, but I can't be with him anymore. I would highly recommend no contact with the batterer. Let the attorney have the contact. If there's a criminal case, the judge will often order no contact as a condition of release. So the batterer really shouldn't be in contact with the victim, or he could risk violating his pre-release conditions and he'll go back to jail. So all of those things are critical for victims to stay safe. Tell family and friends that you've gotten that injunction, make them aware of it. So if they see the batterer driving by the kids' school, or they see the batterer at the church, they can help notify law enforcement. The community can come alongside the victim to keep them safe. Because again, I don't want to scare anybody, but this happens. The kids' school. Sometimes the batterer will take the kids because he wants that victim to take
Yep.
notice. And he's a lot of reasons why the battery occurs is the batterer gets control of the victim, and that makes him feel a sense of control over his world. So when the
Right.
victim leaves and cuts off all contact, the batterer starts to feel that feeling of everything's out of my control
Out
now.
of control.
I
Yeah.
can release it. And in order to get that sense of control back, they may grab the kids because, of course, the victim's going to call if I've got the kids. So, um, a lot of times victims would say to me, well, he's a good dad, he'd never hurt them. But the truth is, if getting a hold of them and scaring them is the way to get that victim back under control, that may be something that the batterer may do. So that safety should be at first and foremost on the victim's mind, not just for herself, but for her children and her loved ones.
Absolutely. I have seen some statistics that show that the rate of people that leave an abuser without a safety plan have an incredibly high rate of being murdered. And again, we don't want to scare people, but we want them to face the reality that domestic violence, 99 times out of 100, will escalate rather than de escalate. Is that how you see it?
Oh my gosh, that's such a great point, and it's exactly right. So for whatever reason, the mechanics of this are, you've got a cycle. So there'll be a violent incident, then there'll be a time of calm, a little honeymoon phase where the batterer is sorry. He says it's never going to happen again, but then the violence will happen again, and it just tends to repeat on a cycle. Every cycle's different. So some victims say this only happens once a year around the holidays, or for some victims, it's once a week, but it
Mhm.
tends to be the case that as the relationship goes forward, the cycle becomes shorter. So if it started out as once a year, it becomes once every 6 months, then once every month, and the violence escalates. So if it begins with pushing, slapping, then he gets away with that. He sees that she's not going to leave. It escalates to punching, hurting, cutting off that airflow. Bones get broken. Every time the victim stays, and the batter sees that she's going to stay, then that violence tends to go up and up and up. So oftentimes I would tell the victim, you've got to get out. I know you think you can manage this because right now you are managing this, but it will get worse. And when it does, you don't know the day that sometimes today's the
Right.
day. The batterer loses his job, the substance abuse, he can't get a hold of it, and he just decides he's going to end his life and end the victim's life too. You don't know when that's going to happen, but you do know you can count on it that the violence will escalate. I can specifically recall a victim who came into me. She had a injured eye, really bad. She said she wanted to drop the charges. I refused, but ultimately she stopped coming to the court hearing. The case got tanked, but I told her, I said, you will be back. And sure enough, 6 months later, she was in there with a broken finger. And I said, welcome back. It will happen again. It will get worse. And you don't want to suffer those consequences. It's time to exit the situation now while you still can before it escalates to a point where you're really very injured, or God forbid, one of your children are, there's something permanent that happens that you have to live with the consequences of for the rest of your life.
Absolutely. And it's sad that so many times that abuser will use or harm the children as a revenge tactic against the victim. It's so sad. I've also heard that almost 100% of abusers are narcissists, thinking only of themselves without the capacity of others. Now, not all narcissists are abusers, but if you also think about the frame of mind, the personality disorder, I think that also gives you an indication of that abuser can't look at themselves honestly. You know, in many cases, as you said, blames the victim for the abuse and can't look at their part in it.
That's right. I think one reason why we all get tripped up by narcissists is all the normal tools we use in relationships that work well with other normal relationships just don't work in a relationship with a narcissist. For example, I have great friendships. If someone hurt my feelings or they did something to hurt me, I tell them, "Hey, you've hurt me." And most people say, "Oh no, I'm so sorry I hurt you." And that's the basis upon which the relationship gets fixed. But you tell a narcissist, "You're hurting me," and they're like, "And?" Because they tend to lack empathy. And I mean, I've not seen the statistics and I'm not a therapist, but I would say just from sitting behind counsel table, I did notice a high proportion of narcissists in that group of batterers who are coming into court. They tend to think of the world as them at the center. They tend to think as nothing is their fault. They tend to totally lack empathy for all of the harm they've caused, even past sentencing. You'll see a narcissist come up there and he's been found guilty of domestic violence. We've heard from the victim, and the judge will give an opportunity to the defendant to say what he wants to say before he gets sentenced. And oftentimes, a narcissist will focus on, "Poor me. I had a bad upbringing. This isn't
Mhm.
fair what happened to me," and won't have a spare thought for the victim and what he's caused for her. So, what I would say about that is if you've identified that you're in an abusive relationship and you've identified that probably narcissist is going on, and you can look online, all the factors are out there to look at, I would say get out. There's nothing, almost nothing you can do to convince a
Right.
narcissist that the violence needs to stop. Because let's face it, this is going to sound silly to say, but violence works.
Mhm.
It's a tool that works. And a narcissist is not going to stop using a tool that works. What he wants is he wants control. Violence gives him control. So he's not going to stop using it in a relationship when it's working so well. Um, and a lot of times, what causes somebody to be a narcissist, they're oftentimes they've been through something bad. As much as victims tend to come from violent homes, batterers tend to come from violent homes. And a lot of times, a victim will, "Well, I hate to abandon him here because I know he went through this horrible childhood where he went through some horrible things." And what I would say is maybe that's true, but A, you can't save him. He's chosen the path of violence here. So no longer you can't help him. You're being hurt too. You're going to die here. And two is you deserve safety. As much as you feel
Mhm.
bad for that batterer, you got to think about yourself here. You deserve to feel safe in your own home. Someone's got to, as you're trying to care for this narcissist, no one is caring for you. So, if once you've determined that that's the case, the only option left to you is escaping that relationship and getting to a place of safety.
Absolutely. Now, I've heard that it takes a woman about 7 times, 7 tries before she actually leaves the abuser. What do you think kind of is the underlying factors going on in that?
I think because oftentimes victims they can tend to be codependent. They want to fix the problems of the people around them. They blame themselves for the issues going on around them, and the narcissist will select somebody who tends to enable the violent behavior, usually out of kind-hearted reasons. A true victim ends up getting caught up in that cycle. They want to help the batterer. They feel responsible for the batterer, but every act of violence tends to make them feel more and more worthless and more helpless. And they tend to look at the batterer as a source, as much as the batterer is a source of violence and uncertainty, the batterer is also a source of financial support and emotional support in their own shallow way. And so once the victim tries to leave the first time, she starts to feel that she's missing those things about the batterer that she loves. And violence, though terrible, is not the worst thing. Financial insecurity is horrible. Feeling alone in the world is horrible. So oftentimes she'll go back to the relationship because she wants all the other things that the relationship provided. She just doesn't want the violence. And the whole time, the batterer is lying to her and saying, it's going to change. I'm going to quit
Mhm.
drinking. I'm going to stop. But I have seen people stop drinking, and there's great programs out there for that. My mom has been sober for over 15 years. It happens, but I've
Mhm.
never seen somebody stop the violence. Once that's
Right.
their go-to in a relationship, that will not change. I've never seen anybody be cured of that. So a victim has got to get out. She tends to know in the back of her mind that it will be more dangerous for her if she leaves. And the statistics are that it is the most dangerous time. When victims do get murdered, it often is because the batterer has realized she's leaving for good this time. And
Mhm.
so that is not a reason to stay, but that is a reason, like you said, to get a safety plan. Don't just run out the door screaming. Maybe line up some documents, place a call to a shelter, have a couple of family members and friends that the batterer doesn't know that you can go to their location. So that way, when he gets the divorce papers or when he gets served with a restraining order, you're not anywhere where he knows where you are. So all of those safety things that you're putting in place help you so that if and when you know you're leaving for good, you don't have to worry about your physical safety when you do that.
And also, don't tell him you're leaving before you leave,
Absolutely.
because that's, we talk about, don't tell him you're when you're physically leaving, but if you tell him, that's as big a warning time as any, right?
Absolutely. We tend to, everybody makes decisions differently. A lot of times we follow our heart, we follow our emotions. When it's time to exit a violent relationship, we got to turn off the emotions, turn off the heart, and listen only to the head. Think strategically. Um, a lot of times we threaten things in relationships because we're not going to do them, right? I'm not putting up with this is the first thing we say before we put up with something. So if you tell a batter, I'm going to leave, probably you're not. When it's time to go, you need to not tell him anything. Start hiding money, getting money set aside, get that separate bank account, put some money in it, because you can count on it. As soon as he realizes you're going, he's going to use all the tools he's been using the whole relationship. If he's been using the finances as a way to keep you under control by not letting you spend and by hiding, turning off the credit cards, that's the first thing he's going to do when you run out the door. So the good thing about victims, one good thing in your favor is you know him, you know what he does, you know the playbook he tends to use. You just expect all that and plan for it. So absolutely do not tell him or anyone close to him. Um, you can count on it. Batterer's mom is going to be on Batterer's side. That is
Mhm.
99.9%. You can count on it.
Right.
That is her baby boy. She does not want to believe she's raised somebody capable of violence. So if he tells her he didn't do it, she's going to believe him. So even though maybe a mother-in-law has been a confidant, Batterer's sister has been somebody that you've complained to, all of these people are going to take his side. Please don't tell them what you're planning, even if they've been part of your social support. It's time to um, focus on your support people that aren't connected to the batterer and trust them, listen to them, and call on them for help.
Exactly. And don't listen to anyone that tells you should stay.
That is so
Absolutely.
huge, and I hate saying this, I'm a Christian, I go to a lovely Christian church. Every faith tradition has, well-meaning people. It's not just Christians, there's, people in every faith tradition who like to see marriage succeed, and they know that, marriage is God ordained, and they don't want to see a marriage fall apart. And they may not realize how dangerous violence is. And they may counsel a victim, hey, we need to try to save this marriage and work this out. I would say, think about violence as a specialty, a specialized thing. Just like I wouldn't proceed to go on a plane and tell the pilot how to do his job. I trust the
Right.
professional, to do what he needs to do. Same thing with a relationship with violence. Go to the violence professionals. So maybe an attorney who's handled cases involving violence, your local domestic violence organization. Violence tends to follow certain patterns, and your violence professionals will know how to keep safe and what to do. Your Never trust anybody who hears that violence has occurred and has told you to stay, because that person may not understand the kind of danger you're in. You want to listen to
Exactly.
professionals who deal with violence all the time, who are going to help you stay safe.
Angela, could you quickly, before we wrap up, tell everybody about your play?
Oh, okay. Thanks for mentioning that. So, during the pandemic, I always would run off to the theater. That's my place that I get my creative energy out, that I really get to feel fulfilled. But during the pandemic, there was no theater going on, so I started to write, and it just came out because I'd had so much experience with the power and control dynamics that are present in a violent relationship. Through my work as a prosecutor, I started to write about that. So I created this story about, it's not about domestic violence. So it's about violence between strangers. But this 40-year-old woman comes to work on a Saturday, and she encounters these two criminals who are breaking into the safe at her workplace. And so they're trying to keep her under control. They're trying to get her to tell them the combination to the safe. They're trying to get her to do certain things. So, and she's trying to manipulate them into fighting amongst themselves so she can escape. So it's about all these different ways that we tend to use and manipulate in relationship. It's kind of a psychological thriller. It has a great ending, and it is about the whole time the 40-year-old main character here is focused on the family members that love her, that need her, that she's got to get back um, to to escape. And so that's what motivates her to get out. And so it sort of takes on all that interesting stuff I've learned. And as an actress, I got really tired of playing the damsel in distress, the mean ex wife or the ditzy love interest. And I wanted to play a character that drove the plot, who rescued herself. So you can see that website down there. If you go to that, you can see this cool 2-minute trailer we shot that's action packed, that kind of shows off the story. You can watch a whole full production we did of the play. You can get in contact with me if you're interested in bringing the play to your theater. But it's just a great way. I had survivors of violence come up to me after we did the show and say, that spoke to me. That is exactly how it felt. That is exactly how I got out. And it really resonated. So go there, check that out. It was tremendous fun, and it let me channel that energy into something hopeful.
Oh, wonderful. Angela, thank you so much for being my guest today. This has been so fact packed, as they say, that I hope it's going to help so many women. And I hope that it's going to help those people that may have seen domestic violence and kept silent not be silent anymore. Is there anything
Absolutely.
else you'd like to share before we go?
Just one last thing is, if you are a victim, please don't be afraid to talk about it. A lot of times we're hiding it, either because we feel like we're going to be judged, we feel like people aren't going to understand, we don't want to upset anyone, and we think it's our responsibility to keep it a secret. And maybe the batters told us that. But I have to say, when you raise your voice and you talk to other people about it, because it's so common, they will be like, oh my gosh, that happened to me. Or, oh my gosh, I that happened to my mom or my sister. Don't be afraid to speak up. You are going to be surrounded by so much more support than you think you are. Like I said, go to that website, email me. I get emails all the time. I love it. It never bothers me. It is my passion to help people escape. If you don't know who else you can talk to me, because we all can play a part in helping encourage a victim But we can't do that if we don't know what's going on. So please speak up.
Absolutely. Now, all of Angela's information as well as mine will be available in the show notes, and you could see this and all our other episodes on the Going Solo YouTube channel, which will be in the show notes as well. Please follow me at her_empowered_divorce on Instagram. There I will share updates, that things relating to divorce that can help you in your journey. I'm also a proud member and founder of the Divorce Coalition. It's a group of top divorce professionals and podcasters dedicated to raising awareness and creating change in domestic violence and abuse. You can join us at Divorce Coalition page on Instagram or Facebook, or you can go to our website, divorcecoalition.com. Join me in our next episode where I'll be diving deeper into what another expert professional can share to help you on your separation and divorce journey. Remember, you are not alone. If you would like to learn more about my divorce and empowerment coaching, go to herempowereddivorce.com. Until next time, stay safe and stay empowered.